Okay, you're on.
Okay, I'm on. It's for the record, May the 1st, 2017. I'm in Austin, Texas, with a great bunch of people in the medical office of Dr. Vinay, with a long last name that I don't pronounce. So, thank you. You may hear a little voice in the background at times. That's all fine. All right. Okay, so forget about the recording. The plan is that we have 2 days together. The reason that I'm here is to spend time with practitioners, users, owners of the Neurolite, and those that expect to be, or their staff. We'll see who else shows up during the day. I know that one of the staff members from People's Pharmacy, I think, is going to be free at 2 o'clock, so she'll be here for the second part of the day as well as Wednesday. Anyway, we're a small group here. That's to a great advantage because we'll be able to focus in very specifically on the needs that you have. The concept of these 2 days is a practicum training and not a theoretical training. I'm doing these things right now because the Neurolite is relatively new. It's only about 6 months old. And I'm learning a lot as to how to help people learn. All right? I can sit up in my mountain home in northern Thailand and have all sorts of theories about how to teach. But more important than teaching is learning. And the only way I get to learn how you learn is by being with you. In the future, I won't be doing these things live. I won't be doing them to small groups. They'll be for a fee, there'll be tuition, and there'll be, online sourcing and all of that. So this is a really special time for all of us that are the early uptakers of the Neurolite. It's good for all of us. It's good for me, it's good for you, because although there are Neurolites in many countries already, I'm not going to all the countries. I'm not going to all the places to sit and do this. So here I am in Austin. My daughter lives here. I have a son-in-law and a granddaughter and a circle of friends and People's Pharmacy and Dr. Vinay's office. So this is, this is true. This is one of the special places because we all get to be together. And I'm looking forward to these 2 days as a practicum training. I've done some number of theoretical trainings which attempt to be practical, but they're with people that have had no exposure. You've had some exposure before, like an uneven level. So in a sense, you're going to be guiding these 2 days as much as me. Okay? I certainly have ideas, and I'm well known to be a talker, so there's no problem in me talking. But what I don't want to do is sit here for 2 days and talk to you. I'd rather be here talking with you. And the focus, we can't avoid some amount of theory, obviously, because some of you have little or none as an exposure to that. And any practicum training that I do has to be anchored in theory anyway. So I'm not just going to say, do this, do this, do this, do this, without any kind of reasoned methodology. The methodology has a basis. So we'll be sliding back and forth between theory and practicum with a clear mind that I want us to go away after the end of these 2 days with a much more confident approach to using it with people. Okay? So, what I oftentimes say in public events, it's kind of it's like a speaker's mechanism to get attention, right? I'll say, which happens to be true, that the Neurolite is not important. Which is, well, what? I just paid $4,000 for something that's not important. Then I pause, let the feeling vibrate a little bit and say, the Neurolite is not important if you don't understand and appreciate neuroplasticity. All right? If a person doesn't appreciate neuroplasticity, then the Neurolight might be fascinating or entertaining or peculiar, or it reminds them of things they've seen in the past, so they assume it's that. That's understandable and expected, but I normally, in some way or another, especially in a group setting, a learning experience, need to focus a little bit on neuroplasticity to frame, to make this sensible to you. And I'm going to do just a little bit of that. I'm assuming that you're aware of it, so I don't need to spend time. Neuroplasticity is a principle related to the brain, although the suspicion is that it relates to all complex adaptive systems. That the brain is forever changing. An older medical idea was that once we reached adulthood, the adult brain was fundamentally static, and about the only thing that could happen, about the only thing that could happen is that it would degrade. You may have heard things in the past like, when the neuron dies, that's the end of it, and you decrease and degrade. This is untrue. That's the fundamental nature and promise of neuroplasticity, is that because our brain is always changing, adapting and responding, that we can guide it towards the behaviors that we prefer. It's a little bit like there's a car and it's moving all the time, and you're in the car. Wouldn't it be nice to have a steering wheel? Right? Instead of having it go hither, thither, according to what it bumps into. The steering wheel. So neuroplasticity is the validated understanding that there is a steering wheel for the brain, that the brain is moving and changing all the time. Neuroplasticity is rather neutral. It's the way we get into trouble and the way we can get out of trouble. It's in the simplest form, which is a little bit maybe too simple, it's how habits are made. And we can't discover every experience as though we had never experienced anything before. It makes too much demand. So we look for patterns. We look for things that we recognize. I was raised in countries where you drive on the right side. Now I live in Thailand, and I had to learn to drive on the other side, as I would say, the left side. And I encountered so many of my driving habits conflicting with what I was trying to learn. So the brain is always ready for new information, but whenever it can, it'll prefer a recognized pattern or a habit because it's a shortcut. So in neuroplasticity, we deal with this issue. The brain is always changing. It can change for better or worse. It's very responsive. And if possible, it prefers recognized patterns as what we would call habits. So right now you have to think, what are my habits? And it's not difficult for people to appreciate that they have good habits and bad habits. So to me, that's the shortcut in terms of practitioners, or even people using the Neurolight with family and friends, interested in neuroplasticity, that, hey, you've got good habits and bad habits. They can change. You can turn a bad habit into a good habit. You can, unfortunately, change a good habit into a bad habit. So, this is wonderful, but also important. Just because you want something doesn't mean that you'll get it. Just because you want the brain to be a certain way, if you don't help the brain learn that with a kind of methodology, it's probably not going to happen. So here we are, appreciating neuroplasticity and the fact that the brain is always changing like a moving car, and that we can have a steering wheel to help that change go where we want to go. Okay, that's really good news. With the Neurolight, what you'll discover as you work with people, whether again yourself, family, friends, or patients, or clients, or whatever, is that so many of the methodologies are common sense. You've already encountered them in your life. That's because the brain is the way it is. It's not as though there are two separate sets of rules in life. One is about the way we've been living life, and the other is neuroplasticity. What you'll discover, maybe it's an issue of language at first, or like changing a perspective, but so many of the ways that you'll use the Neurolite are ways that you know how to get good results in life, period. One of the things that we need to appreciate is that your body is the brain, your brain is the body. We're not talking about the mind, our subjective experience. There's a great perennial debate as to the nature of the mind, right? Consciousness. There are those that, to me, in a puzzling manner, claim that there is no mind, there is no consciousness. It's an epiphenomena, it's kind of the foam on the beer, and yet they're using their mind to propose the fact that they have no mind. Yeah. So that's kind of an adventurous position, I would say. So we're not talking about the mind, although we experience the mind the brain as the mind. But we also experience the brain as the body. So you don't, like right now I'm doing these things with my arms, oh, that's my body, that's not my brain. That is my brain. This is my brain acting somatically, kinesthetically. So another thing to help people is to understand that although they might be experiencing the mind, that the brain is the body is the brain. And a lot of the things they know, say, about physical exercise are because of the nature of the brain. Right? So I think what's important is to not take people too far into a complexity about neuroplasticity and then have to bring them back to common life. Okay. Because so much of neuroplasticity has evidence in common life. That's why I think unless it's a very young child, everybody understands habits. Give me an example of a habit that you have. Good or bad? What's a habit?
Put me on the spot.
I don't like playing choo-choo train, where I take people round and round in circles all day.
I have a bad habit of not eating breakfast.
Okay, all right. We won't discuss why you even call that bad, but that meaning that without thinking, without determining, you get up, you do your things, and you'll notice, without deciding, that you've skipped breakfast. I have an example of a habit that really taught me a lot. And okay, it's a little bit on the personal side. That's okay. I worked out of my home office for a long time. And I did sessions, and I was always on the clock. For years and years and years, I lived on the clock. And between sessions, I would go into the kitchen, which was the easiest place, and wash my hands. And I had a clock up in the wall above the stove. Mm-hmm. I'd go in, boom, boom. Same circumstance, 20 years, right? I am much a creature of habit, I'll admit. So things in my life changed. Actually, it was a divorce. And that clock was gone, right? Funny how things are, right? So that clock was gone. And I was living in the home alone, but still doing my work, still I had 2 home offices inside. And I would come into the kitchen, wash my hands, and look up at the wall that had no clock. Again and again and again and again. I knew there was no damn clock there. But once I got into my routine and I came in the room and was going to go wash my hands, my head would do that. And it became so comical to me. It's so comical, like, I'm not a stupid person. I know there's no clock there. If you ask me, is there a clock there? I'll say no. But I'd walk in day after day, there was no clock, and I would look. So it made me think, how many other aspects of my life are like that? That I don't, because I wouldn't have known I was that habituated to looking at the clock until there was no clock. And I was absurdly still looking at the wall. Even though I would laugh about it and think about it and everything, I'd walk in, once I got back into my routine. Okay. A funny side note about that is that I finally went out and bought a clock. The same style of clock. I went up there, on a chair, I put it back up there in the same spot. I said, there. Okay, I turned around, got off the chair, walked away. As I was walking out of the room, the clock fell off the wall and broke. This is getting like way, way too cosmic here. Like, So, this is the domain in which we're working with the neurolite. You can give an example of a habit, not eating breakfast. My habit of looking at the clock was really not like a good habit or a bad habit. It provided a function, so I guess you could say it was functional, therefore good. But it wasn't, there was no stigma attached to it. Oh, I really want to not have that bad habit. Oh, I really want to have that good habit. It was just a habit that was embedded in the regularity of my life. So you could reflect, or you can ask people that you're working with, can they identify consciously a habit that they have and let them know this is an example of how you train your brain. This is neuroplasticity. In the beginning, you didn't have the habit. Like when I drive in Thailand on the left side, in the beginning, it was all conscious decision making, and I actually had to fight against my reflexes of which way I looked first, or to make a left turn or a right turn. It was stressful because I was doing this in Bangkok traffic, which has no traffic plan that I could ever imagine, right? And everything is quite literally opposite, and even they have these U-turn features that we're not used to here. So, but now, some number of years later, I get in the car and I go, and it's odd. If I think about it, then I start to freeze up again. But the new habit of the driving on the other side is now functionally replacing the old. Yet when I come back here, immediately the right hand reflexes are there. So, losing or changing habits, deep old habits, sometimes it's an unlearning with a new learning, and sometimes it's a layered learning, which is why when you have what we'll call it's a little bit oversimplistic, and I don't really like using the term good and bad too much, but let's use that. Sometimes you have a bad habit, and you can create a new good habit in relation to that. But you may think that the old bad habit is gone, where in fact it's layered, and by association, the habit will be triggered. By association. Like there are people, I'm told, say addicts to, I think we're all probably addicted, but let's say an alcoholic, which is probably the best known addiction, or maybe smoking, cigarettes. If you, quote unquote, break that habit, it's possible that the habit is still there, but you've layered a new neuroplastic behavior on the top of it. If you go back into an environment where all the signals tell you that it's time to have a drink, like when I come back to the US and the driving's on the right side, it doesn't take but a few moments to do that. Now, admittedly, there are a few times, if you toss in jet lag, which is a wonderful confuser, when I was in LA, and I had a car, that I'd wonder, why is that car driving straight towards me? And then I realized, oh, I'm on the wrong side of the road. And I got over. But this is the thing, that neuroplasticity explains so much of behavior. It explains so much of common experience that now, having a better understanding of neuroplasticity and also having certain technologies, we can take advantage in a way that we couldn't take before. But at the same time, we realize that a lot of traditional techniques work the way they work because of neuroplastic dynamics. We didn't know the mechanisms. You know, why mindfulness practices work, why yoga practices work, why so many things work the way they work can be better understood now because of neuroplasticity. And to me, it creates one of the first times that traditional wellness and healthcare practices and current evolving new and sometimes technologically based wellness and healthcare practices can have a very intimate relationship because of the principle of neuroplasticity. You know, that you can recommend some very elegant technological based things like the Neurolite, and at the same time, as a neuroplastic reinforcement, recommend a certain traditional yogic breathing technique. And you realize that they're working on the same principle in what I call the same vector towards the same goal. One is ultra-modern, one is ancient, and yet it's exactly the same principle. So, okay. So that's this thing about neuroplasticity. You'll see in these 2 days when I go into practical applications that behind it is this issue of the steering wheel in the car that's always moving. That a lot of it you already know, but maybe you haven't framed it that way. Okay? So let's say that's a beginning right now. There are just a few of us here. Are there any questions or comments, anything you want to talk about?
When you said 6 months ago it was done, was it like November, December of last year?
Maybe we're closer to 7 months now. But yeah, when I say we, I have an engineering manufacturing partner, and then there's myself as the creative designer, composer, the idea maker, basically. And we had reached a stage of comfortable completion, but we're not really ready to launch. I mean, there's some things I'll talk about later on that you'll see why. But we got an invitation to a very respected, large, well-known anti-aging medical conference in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought, well, we shouldn't say no. So I hurriedly made up a big PowerPoint presentation and narrated it and did these things, and my manufacturing partner went over and did a presentation and introduced it. So, you know, that brought it out there. So that would have been probably 7 months ago. So this is brand new. The way that it is, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, is partly because of new discovery, but also accumulation of a lot of research and also my personal experience over the past 20, 25 years designing devices and working with methodologies and so on. The category, if a person were to ask, especially in terms of, say, regulatory issues or legalities or medical practices and so on, because it varies from country to country, you know, you could say that this is an advanced form of light and sound brain entrainment. Right? It's an advanced form of light and sound brain entrainment. And the key words there are brain entrainment, because brain entrainment as a method and devices has been around for pushing 40 years. You can buy light or sound or light sound brain entrainment devices openly over the counter. There are several sources for them. In that sense, it fits a pre-existing, a predicate category, which any person can buy and use, as long as they don't make medical claims. The idea is that it works towards kind of exercising the brain, learning, mood adjustment, meditation, relaxation, optimizing the body's wellness. You know, all of these issues, these technologies have been around and are widely available. If you search on the internet, you'll see all sorts of companies selling them in different countries. So categorically, it's very comfortable in that it has a strong predicate position in wellness. It's sold openly to any person. Any person can use it, either personally or professionally, within the context of their licensure and claim, and everybody's happy. So the why is it advanced? And I guess that's the interesting word there, which is very flexible. The way that the signals are composed is very different. It uses a fraction of what I would call classic brain entrainment. Hard to give it a metric, but maybe 15% of the signal compositions use the conventional brain entrainment process, which is very easy to understand. If you hear a song, your foot starts to tap, right? You are becoming entrained, or you are frequency following the sound signal. And what was appreciated with techniques like EEG is that if you measure, basically you're measuring just a very superficial average cortex. You know, what's going on in the bulk of the brain is not reflected in EEG. But you could see signals, pulses, and then I'm making this very simple. Let's say you're seeing a dominant 10 hertz, like a mid-alpha range, and you introduce like a 6 hertz signal that, given some amount of time, that the brain would begin to orient itself to the 6 hertz. It would start to tap its cranial foot to the signal. So, well, that's really interesting. It was originally called the frequency following response, and then became called brain entrainment. But the idea is not shocking, because we follow frequency all the time. That's why, you know, people can march together or do line dancing together, or even if you're by yourself, as I say, you know, your foot begins to unconsciously tap to the music. So the brain has a willingness to associate with signals that are external. There's a willingness there. You don't have to try to understand the music intellectually to try to hear the beat and then try to move your foot. No, there's a shortcut. There's a willingness, kind of a ready, willing, and ableness of the brain to associate with signals and adapt to those signals pretty easily. The difference here, well, there are lots of technical differences, I can say, because of, like, just the sound aspect alone has typically at least 5 layers of signal layering or modulation. It's not just music. There's a musical quality which is called mood framing, but I won't go into the details, but the sound alone is extremely rich and supersedes basic sound entrainment. The other is that the light, both the hardware and the composition, is very different. There are, because I notice I keep on calling them compositions, right? If I was a musical composer, which I wish I was, but I'm not, and I was composing, it's not really a song, if I was composing a musical piece that was without lyrics, and I had experienced terrible loss, and I was grieving, and I wanted to express that in a musical score or a symphony or just, you know, a tune, I could do that. And so let's say we would, you know, play it and record it, and you would listen to it. You don't know the intent of the composition, and there are no words, there are no lyrics. You would start to feel melancholic or sad, or you'd feel the heart being pulled in, like, towards grief. How in the world do you end up in that feeling state, in that mind state, from listening to sound signals? And you have no concept that it's supposed to be sad. And yet that's a really melancholic, sad, somber music. You can see that what I say about music is that music is what the brain does all the time, and it wants to hear it out loud. That music is what's going on in the brain, and you get to hear it out loud. Because when you're sad, right? That's what's going on in your brain. So if you're composing the music, you're putting into signal sets what you're experiencing in your brain as sadness. And that's why when you hear it, another person, you feel the sadness too. So, using again the analogy of music, all of human history, human cultures have made music. And the music is radically different, and yet it has always a musical quality, number one. And number two, we like music. Now, this would be the most cosmic coincidence ever if humans had the urge to make music, and by coincidence, we also like what we make. Right? That would be bizarre. But the fact is that we like it because that's the way our brain works. That the way the brain is why music is the way it is, which is why we like music, because the brain made it. It's our nature. So in composition, with sound and light, we know that we can create a probability of different changes in the brain. Brain patterns, what you could call mind states, emotional states, and a lot of these have been researched and registered over the past 50 years. The subjective experience of objective measures. So when I create compositions, there are two types of compositions. One composition tells a story. Like, what makes a good story a good story? What makes a movie a good movie? Right? The closer, it has to make sense. Because the basic thing that the brain is always doing is trying to find signal in noise. It's trying to convert meaningless into meaningful. It's trying to turn nonsense into sense. Because we have so much stimulation, it's nonsense, it's noise, it's meaningless. And we have to derive meaning. Like if you've ever, had anesthesia and you're coming out of anesthesia, at first it's this confused, disoriented, you can't quite see and you don't really remember what's going on. You're getting all the information, but the brain is not yet capable of efficient processing of nonsense into sense, meaningless into meaningful, noise into signal. So one kind of composition, which is already in human civilization, that I also use as a composition style in the Neurolight, is that some of these, we'll call them sessions, I call them compositions. Some of them are more of a storytelling, where you start where you are, you don't know where you're going, but the story leads you there. It's a constant discovery where one thing leads to another. And sometimes there's conflict and there's character development. It's like that. And the other type of composition is not when you tell a story, which is more linear,